Has Ukraine's much vaunted counteroffensive failed? Well, that's what Russia is saying. Ukrainian forces had been attempting to penetrate Russian defenses on front lines in the east and south of the country. 4 months on, with not much progress on the ground, in the last 4 months since the launch of the counteroffensive, nothing has happened on ground and in the front line. Russian defense minister says, and I quote, "The enemy's attempts to break through our defenses in the areas of Verbovoye and Rabotino on the Zaporizhia front have failed." Kremlin also asserts that it has pushed back the Ukrainian troops from Bakhmut in the eastern front in the war-battered Donetsk region. Kyiv claims to have taken back about 47 square kilometers of territory around Bakhmut since starting its counteroffensive in early June. Kyiv launched the long-awaited counteroffensive in June, but has acknowledged slow progress as its forces crashed into sophisticated and kilometers-deep Russian defensive positions. The operation by Kyiv was strategically planned with the help of intel from the West. It was also executed with the help of heavy Western weaponry. The West provided almost all the arms and ammunition sought by the Ukrainian president. But perhaps the Russian defenses were underestimated. Many Western bloggers claimed that the poorly motivated Russian troops would flee as the Ukrainian offensive begins. But the Moscow troops remain entrenched. The Russians had months to back themselves. They dug in deep, fortified the defensive positions along the entire 1,000-kilometer front. Barriers, including trenches and various obstacles, were placed. These effectively made the movement of tanks and armored vehicles almost impossible. From the sky, Russians kept bombarding, making it increasingly difficult for Ukrainians to gain any ground. And now another winter is coming. The ground will once again become sloppy. Mud and snow makes the region unsuitable for movement of vehicles. A mix of rain and bitter cold have influenced the outcomes of military campaigns throughout history and dashed the aspirations of Napoleon or even Hitler. Retired Colonel Daniel L. Davis is a military expert and senior fellow for defense priorities. He's now joining us from Starling, Virginia. Colonel Daniel, welcome to the show. Russia says it has proof that the counteroffensive is failing. But I want your own assessment of this counteroffensive so far. Let's start from there and then give us your thoughts about Russia's claims.
Well, I mean, look, you just have to look at the map, and it doesn't take much of an examination to be able to see that the lines have virtually remained unchanged since this offensive began. The New York Times, I believe it was last week, in fact, had a graphic where it showed the map of Ukraine and to the part that was controlled by Russia, the part that was controlled by Kiev, and and they showed the changes that have occurred since January 1st of this year, to include all the nearly 4 months of the offensive. And you can see very clearly that virtually nothing has changed. In fact, there was a military organization called The Drive here, a magazine, that actually produced a graphic that showed that overall this year, Russia has actually gained somewhat more territory than Ukraine has. So there's, by any assessment, by any kind of an analysis, the offensive has not succeeded. Their goal was to cut through to the Azov coast, to go through the Robotina area from the Zaporizhia, to cut through Tokmak, and then down to Melitopol, and then to the coast. And nothing close to that has even happened. After 4 months, they got what they probably would have had to have gotten at the end of the first week with Robotina, but they haven't even been able to go to Verbova, which is the next little village over, since August, when they first arrived at it. So that kind of tells you all you need to know about what this offensive has not accomplished.
Colonel Daniel, now another winter is coming. The ground will once again become sloppy, like I said. What do you anticipate in the coming months?
Yeah, that's a real important issue, because the only way that Ukraine has had even moderate success in the tactical fight here has been that they've used armored vehicles to get their infantry close to the line of contact, get them out, and then return back to pick them up later. But if you can't get those armored vehicles up there, and of course when it gets really muddy, it gets very difficult for armored vehicles to make it through mud, because those tracks or wheels, either one, can get mired in there. Anytime a vehicle gets struck in mud, it's going to be an immediate target for artillery or for kamikaze drones. And that, if Ukraine therefore can't even get to the front line with enough troops, then they can't make progress. So I think the best thing they're going to be able to do is probably either still try to inch forward, but at very, very high cost in infantry, or what they should do, probably what makes the most sense, is to convert to the defense to make sure they don't lose any more ground.
Colonel Daniel, finally, and besides this, or what is happening in Ukraine, there are claims that Russia is now testing missiles or nuclear missile tests. What do you make of these claims?
You know, I mean, there's been the risk of nuclear escalation from day one. And as long as Russia is not any threat to actually lose the war, or being driven out of Ukraine, or especially any kind of a movement military into Russia proper, then the risk of nuclear escalation is quite high. But in the meantime, I think that these are probably just saber-rattling kinds of moves by Russia. They want to keep everybody up at the front that we have nuclear weapons, so don't push us too far. But I don't think we're at any risk of nuclear use at the moment. But getting this war over will be the best way to ensure that doesn't happen.
All right, I've been talking to a military expert and senior fellow for defense priorities. His name is retired Colonel Daniel L. Davis. Daniel, thank you for talking to us today.
Thanks for having me.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.